I'm going to first introduce our first panellist, which is Mike Byrne, who is the 2011 chair of the RSPG. And I suspect is going to tell us a lot more about mobile internet than I knew or than I know now. In 20 minutes' time, I'm going to consider myself a much more qualified person to annoy the panel with provocative questions with. So, Mike, the floor is yours. And a reminder for the audience, there will be question and answer at the end of this panel. If you've been feeling during the course of the day that there are things that you want to raise that haven't been raised, that will definitely be a further opportunity to do so. And I do encourage you to think about how to ask a question in that period and the example that we've been given. So thank you. Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of RSPG, I'm delighted to be able to present to you today on All for Broadband, Broadband for All conference. Before I begin, I would just like to extend the thanks of RSPG to Gabor and to our colleagues in NMHH for facilitating this fabulous conference today. It's been an excellent conference so far, and in such a superb auditorium. I think it's quite apt that we can gather here today for each of us to tell our stories about broadband, whether it's coming from a spectrum, which is what I'm going to talk about, or fixed, or cable, or satellite. And each of us have our own stories to tell. And I think it's quite apt that we have such august poets and playwrights, as I understand, looking down at us and looking down at our work today. I wonder what would they make of it all. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm sure we are all aware already, if we hadn't been before, if we are from today anyway, that one of the greatest challenges facing Europe is knowing how best to stimulate our economic growth. It has been many times demonstrated that information, communication and technology can play a crucial role in driving competitiveness, increasing job creation and supporting better quality communications for businesses and for citizens alike. Digital inclusion leads to social inclusion, and digital inclusion has been seen to provide many benefits, including significant savings for governments, improved academic performance, better access to vital services, and an overall positive impact on GDP. By recognising the key role that spectrum plays in supporting these objectives, we can maximise its contribution, a contribution that is potentially very significant. The Radio Spectrum Policy Group plays a central part in ensuring those benefits are achieved by providing the best possible policy advice on how spectrum is managed, thereby ensuring the best outcome for all. In my presentation today, I have 4 key areas I want to talk about. First of all, I want to introduce the Radio Spectrum Policy Group to you and to talk a little bit about the work that we've achieved over the past number of years. I think that's important because, as the Minister said at the start today, this isn't a regulatory conference. It's more important than that. I want to talk a little bit as well about spectrum use and perhaps give some of my views on best practices. I want to talk about the Radio Spectrum Policy Group and how it links with the Radio Spectrum Policy Programme. And I also want to talk about our work for this year and in the coming years. High-level policies adopted at a European level that apply service and technology-neutral principles can increase competition, facilitate innovation and support and consolidate the internal market. Using spectrum as a tool for bridging the digital divide, which is a point that has come up continuously or in a number of different presentations already today, especially by using it to facilitate ubiquitous broadband, can maximise the economic and social value that applies to radio spectrum, a natural national resource. If I may, just to say a few things about the RSPG itself, for those of you who may not be aware of us, it's a group of advisory. It's an advisory group, a policy advisory group made up of senior officials from national regulatory authorities and from ministries. It also includes members from the European Commission, and there are some observers. The group I'm honoured to chair the group for 2011, having taken over from my colleague Roberto Viola, and before that from our Hungarian colleague Mr. Daniel Pataki, who was chair back in 2009. The group has been in existence since 2002, and importantly, one of the consequences of the new regulatory framework, which is required to be transposed into national law by May of this year, is that now we have a responsibility to provide opinions and reports to the European Parliament and other European institutions, as well as to the European Commission. If I could just briefly mention some of the work that RSPG has been engaged on. Over the years, we've provided strategic advice and adopted opinions on areas as varied as secondary trading, digital switchover, the digital dividend, and the collective use of spectrum. One of the cornerstones opinions that we provided was on WAPEX, which is the Wireless Application Policy for Electronic Communication Services, which is the cornerstone of service and technology neutrality, which is something we've heard quite a bit about today already in our presentations. These expert opinions now represent a significant body of work, and they have been achieved over a number of years. Underpinning this body of work are some key areas which represent best practice in the use of spectrum, and I think it's worth to take time out to reflect on what could be possibly the best practices for the use of spectrum, particularly as we're now looking at a 5-year radio spectrum policy programme for Europe. And these are my views on it. The first of these is enhanced cooperation and coordination and harmonisation of technical parameters for the use of and the availability of spectrum will lead to increased economies of scope and scale in order to facilitate the further development of the internal market. This is a point as well that has been mentioned a number of times. A market of 500 million is much better than a market of 5 million. And a market of 1 billion is much better than a market of 500 million. So how radio spectrum is used in Ireland or in Dublin is as relevant as to how it's used in Budapest or Rome or Seoul, where I visited 2 years ago, or Tokyo, where I visited last year, to see what they're doing and the services that they're providing to their consumers, both business and residential. The second key area is to ensure that the principles of service and technology neutrality are maintained consistently so as to maximise competition, reduce access barriers, and to support innovation across all frequency bands. There was a comment from one of the previous speakers about the importance of innovation and about how regulation should not be a barrier to innovation. I completely agree. Regulation should add value to innovation, and if it's done correctly, it will add significant value. And perhaps the greatest area in which regulators can innovate is in how radio spectrum is used. Thirdly, by facilitating the development of market mechanisms such as spectrum trading, the effectiveness and efficiency of spectrum can be greatly increased. The revised directives contain significant regulatory improvements that support this. By lowering overall access for spectrum for new users, we can increase competition, which in turn can facilitate ubiquitous broadband delivery, and in doing so can foster digital inclusion and therefore social inclusion for all citizens. Finally, in creating the links between spectrum policies and other sectoral policies, which was a point that was mentioned by our colleague from the FCC earlier today, we can take a more holistic approach to the use of spectrum, which will be more supportive of the high-level goals of the EU, not just in terms of technological development, but also in terms of economic growth and connectedness.